My parents spent my college savings to buy my brother a brand new car, while I trudged miles to work every single day. Years later, they turned up pleading for help, utterly unaware of what I had become. Can you even imagine waking up one day to find your own parents had committed identity fraud against you? Not a stranger, not an enemy, but the two people who were supposed to protect you. That day, they didn't just steal my name, they ignited a fuse that would eventually burn their entire world down. My name is Michael, and for as long as I can remember, my whole family revolved around one person, my older brother, Nathan. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I mean, literally. If Nathan got a C, it was always the teacher's fault. If I got an A-, my parents would just shake their heads and tell me I wasn't living up to my potential. That was the relentless rhythm of my life. Nathan always shining in this blinding spotlight, while I was perpetually shoved into the shadows, expected to quietly make do with whatever scraps of attention were left over. I grew up understanding that in our house, love wasn't something shared equally. It was a currency, and my parents invested every single cent of it into Nathan. The first memory that still makes my gut twist goes all the way back to when I was about 12. I'd been saving every allowance penny, every birthday dollar, for months. My dream? A brand new set of art supplies. Drawing was my escape, my little corner of happiness in a house that often felt suffocating. But one morning, I went to grab my jar of bills and coins, and it was just gone. At dinner, my mom, so casual it made my blood run cold, told me Nathan needed some extra lunch money, and she'd used mine. Her exact words. "You'll get over it faster." I just sat there in utter silence, the spaghetti on my plate growing cold. A stark, chilling realization washed over me: in this family, my wants were always negotiable. Nathan's? Sacred. That night, lying awake, staring at the ceiling, I made myself a silent promise. One day, I'd find a way to make all of this mean something. My effort, my patience, my endurance, they wouldn't go unnoticed forever. Years passed, but the pattern never changed. It only grew sharper, more painful. By the time Nathan turned 18, my parents practically built his entire life for him. They paid for his driving lessons, helped him get a job through one of my dad's old friends, even gave him their old car. Meanwhile, when I cautiously asked if I could sign up for an after-school tutoring program, a program I hoped would help me get college scholarships, my mom frowned. "We can't afford luxuries like that," she said. Luxuries. That word burned a hole right through me. My education, my future, was a luxury, while Nathan's every whim was a necessity. Then came the day that truly defined the rest of my life. I was 17, just about to graduate high school. I'd actually gotten into a decent college, and even though my parents offered zero support, I thought I could rely on the savings account my grandparents had started for me when I was a baby. They used to tell me every single visit, "This is for Michael's education, no matter what." Over the years, I'd heard my parents mention it too, always vaguely, always dismissively. But it was the only financial security I thought I had. That fund was supposed to be my ticket out. But when I brought up tuition at dinner one night, my dad exchanged that look with my mom. You know the one. That look told me everything before he even opened his mouth. "We had to use the money," he said flatly. My fork froze in midair. "What do you mean you used it?" My chest felt like it was collapsing. My mom jumped in, her voice unnervingly calm, like she was explaining something obvious to a child. "Your brother needed a reliable car to commute to work. We couldn't let him fail. You're smart, Michael. You'll find a way to make it without the savings." Nathan needed it more. Nathan needed it more, the words echoed, hollow and deafening in my head. My college fund. Years of careful saving. Promises from my grandparents. Gone. Converted into shiny metal and leather seats, parked right in our driveway. That night, Nathan stood proudly by his brand new car, grinning like a king. My parents fussed over him, taking photos, telling him how proud they were. I stood on the porch, my college acceptance letter folded in my pocket, wondering how I was supposed to walk miles to work while they celebrated the theft of my future. The months that followed were brutal. I picked up shifts at a local diner, sometimes walking 40 minutes in the pouring rain just to clock in. I watched Nathan drive past me more than once, music blasting, windows down, never slowing, never acknowledging me. Sometimes I'd get home late at night and see him tossing his keys on the kitchen counter, complaining about how annoying it was to pay for gas. My parents would nod sympathetically, pulling bills from their wallets to cover him, while I slipped off to bed with blistered feet and aching legs. The bitterness dug deep into me, but so did an unshakable determination. I couldn't collapse. I couldn't let this be the end of my story. That's when I learned how to endure. Every step I walked to work, every hour I studied under flickering diner lights after shifts, every time I smiled at rude customers just to keep my paycheck, it all layered into something heavier, something sharper. I was carrying not just my dreams, but a quiet, simmering anger. My parents thought they had robbed me of a future, but what they really did was light a fire I refused to let die. Those years after high school were some of the hardest of my life, but they also shaped me more than I ever thought possible. I worked doubles at the diner, picked up odd jobs anywhere I could, landscaping, delivering groceries, cleaning offices. I did it all. Meanwhile, Nathan cruised around town in that shiny car bought with my future, posting pictures on social media about hard work paying off. The irony never failed to make me laugh bitterly under my breath. But if there's one thing I learned, it's that silence can be powerful. I didn't scream, didn't argue, didn't let them see me break. I let them believe I was defeated. When in reality, I was building something in secret. While I was clawing my way through those early years, the favoritism at home only grew sharper, cutting deeper every time I visited. My parents liked to act as though Nathan's success was a shared family achievement, and my struggles were solely my own fault. I remember one night when I came home after a 12-hour shift, smelling like fryer grease and stale coffee. Nathan was lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone while Mom fussed over him with a plate of food. Dad looked me up and down as I walked in, utterly exhausted, and said, "Michael, maybe if you were more like your brother, you wouldn't be working yourself to death." Nathan chuckled without even looking up. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted iron, but I didn't say a word. There were countless small cuts like that. At family dinners, conversation always revolved around Nathan, his job, his car, his future plans. If I tried to share something, Mom would wave her hand and say, "We'll talk about that later." Later never came. On birthdays, Nathan got gifts wrapped in glossy paper, expensive headphones, new clothes, gadgets. When it was my turn, I got socks, maybe a cheap wallet, and always the phrase, "We're saving money these days." You understand. But the worst came during my second year of college. Yes, I found a way to get there despite them. I had scraped together enough scholarships, grants, and loans to enroll at a state school, balancing classes with brutal work hours. One weekend, I came home to find Nathan proudly announcing that Mom and Dad had co-signed a loan for him so he could start his own business, a car detailing shop, of all things. He'd been watching YouTube tutorials for months and suddenly fancied himself an entrepreneur. I remember sitting there clutching the strap of my worn-out backpack, listening to Dad say, "Sometimes you have to take risks for the child who's going places." That sentence nearly broke me. The child who's going places, I had been killing myself trying to make something of my life. And yet, in their eyes, Nathan was the only one worth gambling on. That night, I went back to campus and studied until dawn, tears blurring the pages of my textbooks. I swore to myself again, one day, they'd regret every word, every choice that painted me invisible. The tension didn't just stop with favoritism. It spilled into outright manipulation. During breaks, when I came home, my parents would guilt-trip me about not contributing enough money to the household. "Nathan has expenses," Mom would say. "And you've always been so independent. Can you help out a little more?" It baffled me how they could look me in the eyes and ask for money, knowing I was drowning in debt and working 2 jobs while Nathan burned through cash on business ideas and late-night parties. Once, they even asked if I could put my name down on a credit card for Nathan to build his credit. I laughed right in their faces and walked out. But inside, I felt sick at how utterly shameless they had become. The more they tried to pull me back into their orbit, the more distance I put between us. Phone calls went unanswered. For holidays, I made excuses to stay on campus. I focused on my work, my studies, my slow but steady climb upward. I told myself that success would be my revenge. But at night, lying awake in my cramped dorm, I couldn't shake the anger that simmered beneath everything. I didn't just want to succeed. I wanted them to see it, to choke on it, to realize they had gambled away the one child who had actually been fighting for something real. And yet, the deeper I pulled away, the harder they pushed. My parents started showing up unannounced at my apartment near campus, bringing food containers with Nathan's leftovers, as if that would lure me back. They'd lecture me about family sticking together, while simultaneously reminding me how much they had sacrificed for Nathan. At one point, Mom even tried to guilt me by saying, "We wouldn't have been able to get him that car if you hadn't been so understanding." Understanding. That was her word for it. As if I had agreed to let them rip the rug out from under me. By the time I turned 21, I had stopped seeing them altogether unless I had no choice. I graduated quietly, without even telling them the date of the ceremony. And when I got my first job offer, I celebrated with friends instead of family. But the tension was always there, hanging over me like a storm cloud. I knew that one day they'd come back around. Not with apologies, but with expectations. That's the thing about people like my parents, they don't see betrayal when they commit it. They only see opportunity when they think you've risen high enough to be useful again. And I was right. That day came sooner than I expected. The phone call came on a rainy Tuesday night, just as I was wrapping up a late shift at the office. I was 23 then, only a year into my first real job after college. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid decently, and I was finally starting to feel the ground steady beneath me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and when I saw "Mom" on the screen, my gut twisted. I hadn't spoken to her in months, and calls from my parents were never good news. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Michael," her voice came, sugary sweet in a way that immediately put me on edge. "It's been too long. How are you?" I gave a short, clipped reply. "Busy." "What's going on?" There was a pause, the kind that told me she was gearing up for something. Then she sighed dramatically. "It's about Nathan. He's in a bit of trouble. You know how hard he's been working on his business, right?" I almost laughed out loud. Hard work, the last I'd heard, his car detailing shop was bleeding money, and he'd been bragging online about weekend trips to Vegas. But I bit back the comment, letting her continue. "He just needs a little help, honey. The bank won't extend him any more credit. And your father and I have already put so much into him. We thought, since you're doing well now, you could step in just until he gets back on his feet." I stopped walking, the rain dripping off my jacket as her words sank in. They wanted me. Me? The son they'd robbed blind, to bail Nathan out. My throat tightened, but I kept my voice even. "No. I can't do that." There was silence, then a sharp edge in her tone. "Michael, he's your brother. Family helps family." I hung up without another word. My hands were shaking, not just from anger, but from the deep ache of realization. They hadn't changed at all. In their eyes, I wasn't a son. I was a resource, a backup plan for Nathan's failures. I thought that would be the end of it. But I underestimated just how far they would go. A few weeks later, I came home to my apartment after a long day to find an envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a letter from the bank. At first, I thought it was junk mail, but when I read closer, my stomach dropped. It was a notice about a loan, one I had never applied for. A loan in my name. Panic set in. I called the bank immediately, demanding answers. After a maze of transfers, a representative confirmed it. There was a loan application with my information, name, address, social security number, signed and approved. The funds had already been dispersed. My blood ran cold as the details unfolded. The listed co-signer. Nathan. I remember sitting on my couch in stunned silence, the letter trembling in my hands. My parents hadn't just asked me for help. They had taken it. Somehow, they had used my information, my identity, to secure money for Nathan. It was fraud. It was betrayal on a level I hadn't even thought they were capable of. The next day, I drove to their house, my chest tight with fury. When I walked in, Nathan was sprawled on the couch, watching TV with a smug grin. Mom was in the kitchen, humming like everything was normal. Dad looked up from his newspaper with that same dismissive expression I'd known my whole life. I slammed the letter on the table. "What is this?" My voice cracked with rage. Mom barely flinched. "Oh, that. Don't be so dramatic, Michael. It's just paperwork. Nathan needed a chance, and you weren't going to give it to him. You'll survive. You stole my identity." I spat. Dad folded the paper neatly and set it aside. "Watch your tone. We're your parents. We know what's best for the family." The room spun. Nathan chuckled from the couch, not even bothering to look at me. "Relax, little brother. It's an investment. When my business takes off, you'll thank us." That was the breaking point. Every ounce of patience I had held on to, every quiet promise to myself to rise above, it all cracked wide open. My parents had crossed a line so deep, so vile, that there was no going back. They had stolen from me once with my college fund. But this was worse. This was them looking me in the eye and telling me I didn't matter. Not as a son, not as a person, only as a tool to prop up their golden boy. I walked out of that house without another word, my heart pounding, my vision blurred with anger. But as the night wore on, something else began to burn beneath the fury. A clarity. A plan. If they wanted to use me like a resource, then they had no idea what kind of storm they had just unleashed. That was the night I stopped being their son in any sense of the word. That was the night I decided I wouldn't just get even. I would take back everything they had ever stolen from me, and more. And the first step was already forming in my mind. After that night, it felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. I didn't tell anyone at first, no friends, no coworkers. I carried the weight of that fraud notice like a secret stone in my chest. Too heavy to share, too shameful to explain. Every time I checked the mail, there was another reminder, a bill, an interest statement, a warning about late payments I had never agreed to. My credit, something I had been carefully protecting while juggling scholarships and loans, was suddenly crumbling because of a decision I never made. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the isolation. I couldn't shake the image of Nathan's smug grin, my parents' cold dismissal. The three people who were supposed to have my back had turned into the very people tearing my life apart. I'd walk to work some mornings, hands shoved deep in my pockets, wondering how much more I could take before I snapped. I had spent years swallowing their favoritism, their mockery, their constant reminders that I was the lesser son. But this was different. This wasn't just favoritism. This was sabotage. There were nights I didn't sleep at all. I'd sit at my desk, staring at spreadsheets from my job, trying to focus while my thoughts drifted back to the mess my parents had created. I'd wonder if I was doomed to spend my life cleaning up after Nathan's failures. Sometimes I'd even question whether I was cursed somehow, born into a family that would rather break me than see me thrive. My grades, my work, my sacrifices, they never mattered to them. Only Nathan did. And yet, as the weight pushed me lower, something inside me hardened. If I couldn't rely on them, and by now it was crystal clear that I never could, then I had to build something for myself, something untouchable. I started researching late into the night. Not just how to dispute fraudulent loans and protect myself legally, but how to protect everything I was building. I met with a financial advisor from my company, framing my situation as a hypothetical, but absorbing every word about securing assets, establishing trusts, and shielding income. The more I learned, the more I realized that while my parents thought they had buried me, they had actually handed me the blueprint for freedom. Still, the immediate reality was harsh. I couldn't qualify for a decent apartment lease because of the loan. I had to keep my head down at work, terrified that if anyone dug into my credit, they'd assume I was reckless. For a few months, I lived in a crumbling studio with mold on the ceiling and neighbors who fought loudly through paper-thin walls. Every morning, I woke up to the sound of sirens or slammed doors, and I dragged myself to the office with dark circles under my eyes. It felt like rock bottom. Not the kind you hit once and recover from, but the kind that feels like home after a while. And yet, I didn't tell my parents I was struggling. That was part pride, part strategy. If they thought they had crushed me, let them believe it. Let them think I was still the quiet, compliant son they could exploit. In reality, every bill I paid off, every dollar I tucked away, was another brick in the wall I was building between myself and them. I avoided family gatherings entirely. When my mom called, I let it go to voicemail. When Dad sent her texts like, "Call us. We need to talk about Nathan," I deleted them without replying. Nathan, of course, sent nothing at all. In his mind, I was already irrelevant. A stepping stone he had used and discarded. But while they saw me as weak, I was busy turning that weakness into something else. Every moment of silence I gave them was a moment I spent planning. One particularly low evening, I walked past a car dealership on my way home from work. The shiny vehicles gleamed under the lot lights, polished and perfect. For a second, I was 17 again, standing on the porch while my parents celebrated Nathan's brand new car, the one bought with my stolen future. The memory stung, but it also sharpened me. I whispered under my breath, almost like a vow, "One day, I'll have something you can't touch." And slowly, painfully, I began to carve that path. I picked up freelance work on top of my job. Coding projects, data analysis gigs, anything I could get my hands on. I lived frugally, saving every cent, stashing money in accounts my parents didn't even know existed. My days blurred into long stretches of work, study, and survival. But with every passing week, I could feel the tide turning. Even if just slightly. It was still rock bottom. I was exhausted, lonely, and shackled to debts I hadn't created. But it wasn't permanent. I had decided it wouldn't be. And though I hadn't figured out the how just yet, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: when the time came, when my parents inevitably returned to bleed me dry again, I wouldn't just say no. I would make them regret every single choice that had led us here. The thought of that revenge became the one spark that kept me moving, even in the darkest stretches. And then, just when I thought I could finally breathe again, something happened that changed everything. The turning point didn't come with fireworks or some dramatic windfall. It was quiet, almost unnoticeable at first. One morning, I woke up in that dingy studio apartment, looked around at the water-stained ceiling and the peeling paint, and realized something strange: I wasn't sinking anymore. I was treading water, yes, but the current wasn't dragging me under like before. My debts were slowly shrinking. My side jobs were stacking into real money. My credit dispute case was moving in my favor. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't drowning. I was climbing. I leaned harder into that momentum. My 9-to-5 job had started to notice the hours I poured in. One of my managers pulled me aside after a big project and said, "Michael, you've got real potential. Have you ever thought about leadership?" I didn't say it out loud, but the question lit something in me. Leadership, me. The invisible son, the one my family treated like an afterthought. That was the first time I realized I had something they couldn't take away, the respect of people who valued me for what I could do, not what I could provide for someone else. Within a year, I was promoted. My salary jumped, and with the promotion came more opportunities to network. I started attending industry events, shaking hands with people I never would have dreamed of meeting. Every time I walked into those rooms, I reminded myself, they don't know the boy whose parents stole his future. They only see Michael, the young professional who works hard, who delivers results, who belongs here, on the side. I kept building. The freelance projects that had once been my lifeline turned into something bigger. Word of mouth spread. Clients referred me to other clients, and soon I had enough demand that I considered scaling it. I registered a small LLC, opened separate accounts, and started hiring part-time help. It was surreal. I had gone from barely keeping the lights on to managing a budding business. All without my family knowing a single detail. My living situation improved, too. With my credit finally repairing and my savings growing, I moved out of that moldy studio and into a modest one-bedroom in a quiet part of the city. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, and it didn't smell like mildew or fried food from the neighbor's late-night cooking. I bought furniture that wasn't second-hand, decorated the walls with art I liked, and for the first time, I felt like I had a home. I would sit on my couch after work, laptop open as I managed projects for my side business, and think, this is the life they said I'd never have. Meanwhile, Nathan's life began unraveling in small, almost poetic ways. Word trickled back through mutual acquaintances. His business was failing. The loan money had dried up, and he'd started hopping between jobs. Every post on his social media grew more desperate, all bluster about new schemes that never went anywhere. My parents, of course, doubled down in their support. Every once in a while, I'd get a voicemail from my mom saying things like, "Your brother just needs time. Don't you remember how much we've always been there for you both?" I would listen to her words with a kind of detached fascination, as if she were talking about someone else's family. But the more my star rose, the more I prepared. I didn't just want success for myself. I wanted armor. I wanted to be untouchable, to ensure they could never again exploit me the way they had before. I set up my finances meticulously, multiple accounts, legal protections, contracts for my business that made it impossible for anyone to piggyback off my name without consequences. I began investing, too, stocks, mutual funds, even a stake in a small startup run by a friend I trusted. Piece by piece, I was building something far larger than just a paycheck. And yet, I never flaunted it. To my family, I stayed silent. I answered fewer and fewer of their calls. I let them believe whatever story they wanted to tell themselves about me. Maybe that I was still struggling. Maybe that I was scraping by. The less they knew, the better. Because deep down, I knew the day would come when they'd come knocking again. And this time, I wanted to be ready. I'll never forget the first moment I truly realized how much had changed. I was at a client dinner, an upscale place with white tablecloths and menus that didn't have prices listed. My boss introduced me as one of our rising stars to a table full of executives, and I shook hands with men and women whose signatures controlled millions. I smiled, confident, steady. That night, as I walked home through the city lights, I thought back to all those nights trudging home from the diner, feet blistered, watching Nathan drive by in that car bought with my stolen future. And the thought that struck me hardest wasn't bitterness. It was this: I had built more for myself from nothing than they had ever imagined possible. Still, the voice in the back of my head never let me forget. Success wasn't enough. Not yet. Not when my parents had never apologized, never even admitted what they'd done. Not when Nathan still lounged in the wreckage of his failures, protected by the belief that someone would always clean up after him. And then, as if the universe had been waiting for the right moment, my parents reappeared in full force. They didn't just call this time. They showed up. It was a Saturday morning. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee and was settling down to catch up on some project reports when there was a knock at the door. Not a polite knock either. Heavy, insistent, the kind that makes your stomach clench. I opened it and there they were, my parents standing side by side like some grim parade. With Nathan a step behind them, his hands shoved into his hoodie pocket, his eyes darting around like he couldn't even meet my gaze. For a long moment, none of us spoke. I just stared at them, the steam from my coffee rising between us. My mom finally broke the silence with a forced smile. "Michael, you look well." Her voice cracked on the last word, and I noticed the lines on her face were deeper now, her eyes tired. My dad's jaw was tight, his expression a blend of pride and desperation. Nathan looked worse than both of them, unshaven, his posture slumped, a shadow of the smug brother I'd once known. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. My mom flinched but pressed on. We need your help. Things have been difficult. Nathan's business, it didn't work out, and the house. We're behind on payments. The bank." She faltered, then tried again. "Michael, we know you're doing well now. We thought maybe you could help us get back on our feet, just until things stabilize." I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the silence stretch until it became almost unbearable. "No," I said simply, and started to close the door. But my dad jammed his hand against the frame. "Don't be like this," he snapped. "You wouldn't even be where you are without the sacrifices we made. We gave your brother a chance, and now it's your turn to give back to the family." The audacity almost made me laugh. They had stolen from me, sabotaged me, mocked me, and now they were framing it as sacrifice. I studied them carefully, noting every crack in their armor, every sign of fear and need. That was when it hit me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the powerless one in this dynamic. They needed me. I didn't need them. I didn't let them in, but I didn't send them away immediately either. Instead, I let them talk. And talk they did. My mom begged, my dad barked, and Nathan pathetically mumbled about how things will turn around soon, if only I could lend him some money as an investment. Every word they spoke was a revelation. They weren't just struggling, they were desperate, and desperation makes people sloppy. Over the following weeks, they kept reaching out. Texts, voicemails, even handwritten letters slipped under my door. Each one revealed more. The mortgage was months behind. Nathan's debts were piled so high that collectors were circling. My dad's retirement savings had been drained trying to plug holes. The picture was clear. The golden pedestal they'd built under Nathan had crumbled. And in the wreckage, they had nowhere else to turn but me. Here's the thing. I didn't just ignore them. I watched. I listened. I learned. I reached out quietly to some contacts I'd made in finance, asked a few hypothetical questions, and soon I had a detailed picture of exactly how deep their trouble went. Their house was teetering on foreclosure. Nathan's credit was worse than mine had ever been, and he had liens against his so-called business. They were cornered animals, and I was the one holding the door. At the same time, my own position was stronger than ever. My promotion at work had turned into a senior role, giving me influence and visibility. My side business was thriving, with contracts that secured steady income well beyond my salary. I had investments maturing, assets locked safely away, and legal protections in place. Financially, I was untouchable. Emotionally, I was colder than I'd ever been. They couldn't guilt me anymore, couldn't twist my sense of obligation. That part of me had died the night they stole my name for that fraudulent loan. The setup for revenge wasn't just about having money. It was about having power. For the first time in my life, I had both. They had taken everything from me once. But now they were standing at my door, empty-handed, begging for scraps. And I realized something that made my chest tighten with a strange, almost thrilling kind of clarity. I didn't just want to say no. I wanted them to feel what I had felt all those years ago. Powerless. Small. Disposable. But timing is everything. And I wasn't going to rush. If they wanted help, I would let them believe it was possible. Just long enough to set the stage. Just long enough to make the fall hurt more. That was when I started planning in earnest, drawing up the outlines of something that would not only deny them what they wanted, but expose them for what they had done. Every insult, every theft, every betrayal, they had handed me the tools for this moment. And soon, very soon, I'd use them. Revenge for me wasn't about fire and chaos. It wasn't about screaming in their faces or demanding they pay me back dollar for what they stole. That would have been too easy, too loud. No, I wanted something quieter, something colder. The kind of revenge that lingers, that twists the knife slowly every time they think about me. I wanted them to understand, not in one furious outburst, but in the silence that followed, that they had destroyed the one bridge they could never rebuild. The first step was to let them think they still had a chance. When my parents showed up again a week later, I didn't slam the door in their faces. This time, I invited them in. The look of relief on my mom's face almost made me laugh. They sat at my table, looking around my apartment with thinly veiled surprise. It wasn't extravagant, but it was neat, modern, and filled with things I'd worked for myself. My dad cleared his throat, his pride fighting against his desperation. "We knew you'd come around," he said, as though I had agreed to anything. I listened as they laid out their problems again, the overdue mortgage, the debt collectors, Nathan's failing ventures. They spoke as though all of it was just a temporary setback, something a family contribution could easily fix. Nathan finally piped up, his voice sharp with entitlement despite the bags under his eyes. "If you just cover the mortgage and help me restart the business, we'll be fine. It's an investment in the family." I let them talk, nodding occasionally as though I was considering it. Then, with perfect calm, I said, "I'll think about it, but I need to see the paperwork. The mortgage, the debts, the business expenses. If I'm going to put money into this, I need full transparency." The relief on their faces was immediate. They agreed eagerly, promising to gather everything. My mom even touched my hand and whispered, "We knew you wouldn't abandon us." I smiled thinly, hiding the storm inside me. What they didn't realize was that I already had most of the information. Through contacts and careful research, I knew more about their finances than they thought possible. But asking for the paperwork wasn't about facts. It was about watching them hand me the rope they'd eventually hang themselves with. Over the next few weeks, they delivered stacks of documents. I took them politely, scanning each page as though I were genuinely considering helping. Behind closed doors, though, I compiled everything into a neat, devastating picture. Years of reckless spending, loans opened in my name, assets drained, all while Nathan burned through money on cars, parties, and empty ventures. They had destroyed themselves, and all I had to do was hold up the mirror. The moment came when they pressed me for an answer. We sat again at my kitchen table, the three of them looking at me like starving wolves waiting for meat. My dad leaned forward. "So, are you going to step up or not?" I opened a folder and slid the papers across the table. "Here's what I see," I said calmly. "You took my college savings and bought Nathan a car. You committed fraud by opening loans in my name. You've drained your retirement. Your house is on the edge of foreclosure, and Nathan owes more than he could pay back in 3 lifetimes. And now you want me to fix it." Their faces paled. Nathan tried to laugh it off, but the sound was weak, forced. My mom's hands trembled. My dad's jaw tightened, but even he couldn't mask the fear in his eyes. I leaned back, folding my arms. "Here's my decision. No. Not a cent. You'll lose the house. Nathan will drown in his own debts. And you'll finally have to live with the consequences of every choice you made." The silence that followed was electric. My mom's eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. My dad started to protest, but I raised a hand to cut him off. "Don't. You made your bed when you chose him over me, every single time. You don't get to crawl back now." I stood, walked to the door, and held it open. "Get out." They shuffled past me, broken in a way I had never seen before. Nathan muttered something under his breath. Maybe an insult, maybe a plea, but I didn't care enough to listen. When the door shut behind them, I felt a calmness settle over me. It wasn't joy, exactly. It was something sharper, cleaner. For once, I had the power, and I had wielded it with precision. But the true revenge wasn't just in saying no. It was in making sure they had no way to twist the narrative, no way to paint me as the ungrateful son. I had the documents, the proof of everything they'd done, and I knew exactly what to do with them. Because if they thought losing my help was the worst that could happen, they were about to learn how wrong they were. The fallout was quieter than I imagined, but far more devastating for them. I didn't need to raise my voice or slam my fist on a table. My proof did all the work for me. I started with the fraudulent loan they had taken out in my name. I filed a full report with the bank, attaching the paperwork they themselves had handed over to me. When the fraud investigator called for a follow-up, I answered every question calmly, providing signatures, dates, and even the voicemail my mom had left months earlier, practically admitting they just needed to help Nathan. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within weeks, the bank cleared me of liability. My credit, my future, was safe. The loan, however, didn't just disappear. It shifted back to its origin. Them. My parents and Nathan were now fully responsible for the debt they had tried to bury me under. Next came the mortgage. With the information I'd gathered, I quietly tipped off a legal aid office that specialized in foreclosure cases. I wasn't trying to save them. I wanted everything documented. Their reckless spending, their inability to pay, the fact that they had siphoned my savings into a car that Nathan had wrecked years earlier. The lawyers filed notices that became part of the public record. Anyone could now see just how badly they had mismanaged everything. Their respectable reputation in the neighborhood began to unravel overnight. And as for Nathan, his business debts caught up with him swiftly. Creditors began circling. I knew because one of them, recognizing my last name, accidentally contacted me first. I redirected them, of course, but not before forwarding them copies of the financial statements Nathan had so proudly shown me, claiming they were proof of his potential. With those documents, the creditors had everything they needed to press harder. The first real fallout came when my dad called me, voice shaking with rage. "You destroyed us," he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I let him scream, then cut in with a voice as steady as stone. "No, Dad. You destroyed yourselves. I just stopped you from destroying me, too." And I hung up. After that, the calls stopped. Instead, I began hearing whispers from old neighbors and distant relatives. My parents had lost the house. Nathan had filed for bankruptcy. The family who once paraded their golden child around, mocking me as the lesser son, had become a cautionary tale in the community. Their downfall wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, humiliating, inescapable, exactly the way I wanted it. Months later, I drove past their old house on a whim. It was empty, the windows dark, a foreclosure notice taped to the door. Nathan's car, the one they had stolen my college fund to buy, was gone, too, probably repossessed years back. For a moment, I stood there on the sidewalk, staring at the place where so much of my pain had been born. And instead of bitterness, I felt something colder. Closure. I never saw them again after that. Not in person, at least. I moved forward with my life, my career, my business. The people around me respected me for who I was and what I'd built, not for what they could take from me. That was the sweetest victory of all. And every now and then, when I catch my reflection in the glass of a high-rise office building, I remember the boy walking miles to work while his brother drove by in a stolen future. That boy became a man who built his own path brick by brick, while his so-called family collapsed under the weight of their choices. The last time my father's voice echoed in my head, shouting that I had destroyed them, I finally understood the truth. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply stepped out of the shadow they forced me into and let them destroy themselves. So, tell me, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand like this with family? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one.